David Kim adjusted his reading glasses and pulled up the prescription queue on his computer terminal. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon at the CVS pharmacy in Twin Falls, Idaho. A steady stream of locals picking up medications, asking questions about dosages, requesting flu shots. At 41, David had been a licensed pharmacist for 17 years, the last 8 spent at this particular CVS location. He knew most of his regular customers by name, understood their chronic conditions, recognized when something seemed off with their medications. The bell above the pharmacy counter chimed as a customer approached. David looked up and immediately recognized Marcus Webb, a man who'd become increasingly familiar over the past 6 months. "Afternoon, Marcus," David said with professional courtesy. "Picking up for Mrs. Webb today?" "That's right," Marcus said with his characteristic friendly smile. "Dorothy's arthritis has been acting up. Doctor increased her pain medication." David pulled up the prescription. Dorothy Webb, age 78, OxyContin 80 mg, quantity 90 tablets, prescribed by Dr. Richard Morrison, a powerful opioid in a significant quantity. "I'll need to see ID," David said, standard protocol for controlled substances. Marcus handed over his driver's license. David verified the information, had Marcus sign the controlled substance log, and dispensed the medication with standard counseling about proper use, storage, and disposal. As Marcus left, David made a mental note, nothing unusual about the transaction itself, but something was nagging at his trained pharmacist instinct. This was the 3rd time in 2 weeks Marcus had picked up controlled substance prescriptions, each time claiming it was for his wife. David pulled up his pharmacy system and searched Marcus Webb's pickup history. What he saw made him pause. Over the past 6 months, Marcus Webb had picked up prescriptions for 6 different women, each time identifying the woman as his wife. Dorothy Webb, age 78, Margaret Harrison, age 81, Eleanor Patterson, age 75, Ruth Davidson, age 79, Helen Morrison, age 82, Sylvia Chen, age 77, 6 different wives, all elderly, all on powerful pain medications, anxiety medications or sedatives, different last names, different addresses across Twin Falls and surrounding rural areas. David's analytical mind started connecting patterns that seemed wrong. Legally, Marcus could pick up prescriptions for anyone who authorized him, spouses, relatives, friends providing care, and in rural Idaho, it wasn't uncommon for people to help elderly neighbors with pharmacy runs. But 6 different women, all elderly, all identified as his wife, that strained credibility. David dug deeper into the prescription records. Each woman had similar medication profiles: high-dose opioid pain medications, OxyContin, fentanyl patches, benzodiazepines for anxiety, Xanax, Valium, sleep medications, Ambien, blood pressure medications, multiple prescriptions from different doctors. The opioid and benzodiazepine combinations were particularly concerning. Taken together, they could cause respiratory depression and death. Pharmacists were trained to watch for dangerous drug interactions, and this combination was high risk. What troubled David most was the frequency and quantities. Each woman seemed to be burning through prescriptions faster than typical chronic pain patients. OxyContin prescriptions that should last a month were being refilled after 3 weeks. Xanax prescriptions intended for occasional anxiety were being taken at maximum daily doses continuously. Either these women were all experiencing severe, poorly controlled pain and anxiety, or something else was happening with their medications. David checked the prescribing doctors. The prescriptions came from 4 different physicians across the region: Dr. Richard Morrison, Dr. Susan Park, Dr. James Chen, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez. All legitimate doctors, but not coordinating care if the same man was picking up controlled substances from multiple prescribers for multiple patients. This pattern raised red flags for several concerning possibilities. Diversion. Marcus could be collecting medications from multiple elderly women and selling them. Opioids had high street value. Medication abuse. Marcus could be taking the medications himself, multiple elderly women, and selling them. Opioids had high street value. Medication abuse. Marcus could be taking the medications himself, plants, or tan. In elder exploitation, Marcus could be over-medicating vulnerable elderly women to control them while stealing their money or assets. Something worse. The medication patterns could indicate something more sinister. David faced a dilemma. He had no concrete evidence of wrongdoing, just a pattern that made his professional instinct scream that something was very wrong. Marcus had valid prescriptions from legitimate doctors. The women had presumably authorized him to pick up their medications. Everything was technically legal and proper, but David had been a pharmacist long enough to know that patterns often told stories that individual transactions didn't reveal, and this pattern was deeply troubling. David decided to document his observations and make some inquiries. He printed records of all prescriptions picked up by Marcus Webb over the past 6 months, 37 prescriptions for 6 different women, totaling over $23,000 in medication costs, mostly covered by Medicare. Then David did something that required careful professional judgment. He called Dr. Richard Morrison, who'd prescribed several of the medications Marcus had picked up. "Dr. Morrison, this is David Kim, pharmacist at CVS in Twin Falls. I'm calling regarding some prescriptions for Dorothy Webb. I have some concerns I'd like to discuss with you." "What kind of concerns?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Mrs. Webb is on OxyContin 80 mg, Xanax 2 mg, and Ambien. That's a concerning combination of respiratory depressants. Additionally, I've noticed a pattern where a man named Marcus Webb picks up these prescriptions, claiming to be her husband. But I've also seen him pick up similar controlled substances for 5 other elderly women, each time claiming they're his wife. I'm concerned about potential diversion or elder exploitation." Dr. Morrison was quiet for a moment. "That is concerning. I prescribed the OxyContin for Dorothy's severe arthritis pain. She came to me about 4 months ago as a new patient. Her previous doctor had retired. She was accompanied by a man who introduced himself as her husband, Marcus. He was very involved in her care, knew all her medications, asked good questions, seemed like a devoted spouse. Have you examined Mrs. Webb recently? Observed her behavior or cognitive status? I saw her 8 weeks ago for the initial prescription, then Marcus picked up refills. She was lucid at that first visit, though seemed a bit confused at times. I attributed it to age. Marcus said she didn't like going to doctor's appointments, and he handled most of her medical care. Red flag. A caregiver who isolated an elderly person from direct medical contact could be hiding abuse or exploitation. Dr. Morrison, I think we may have a situation worth investigating. This man is picking up controlled substances for 6 different elderly women from multiple doctors. The medication combinations are dangerous, and he's preventing direct medical supervision by handling everything himself. I'm going to report this to Adult Protective Services and possibly law enforcement. I wanted to give you a heads up. I appreciate you calling," Dr. Morrison said, his tone grave. "I'm going to schedule Dorothy for a follow-up appointment, one that requires her to attend in person. If Marcus tries to keep her from that appointment, we'll know something's wrong." After hanging up with Dr. Morrison, David called Adult Protective Services in Twin Falls County. "This is David Kim, pharmacist at CVS. I need to report concerns about potential exploitation of multiple elderly individuals." Twin Falls County Adult Protective Services investigator Linda Martinez received David Kim's report with immediate concern. Financial exploitation of the elderly was rampant, and the pattern David described, one man collecting controlled substances for 6 elderly women, had all the hallmarks of a predatory scheme. A pharmacist noticed the same man picking up prescriptions for 6 different women over 6 months, each time claiming the woman was his wife. Linda briefed her supervisor, APS Director Robert Chen. "All the women are elderly, isolated, recently widowed, all on high-dose opioids and sedatives. The pharmacist believes we may have diversion, over-medication for control purposes, or elder exploitation. That pattern is extremely concerning," Chen said. "One caregiver for multiple unrelated elderly people isn't unusual. Professional caregivers serve multiple clients, but claiming each is his wife is deceptive. And the controlled substance pattern suggests possible criminal activity beyond just car provision." Linda began investigating the 6 women David had identified. Public record searches revealed concerning patterns. Dorothy Webb, age 78, widowed 18 months ago, husband died of cancer, owned her home outright, valued at $320,000, had substantial retirement savings, approximately $450,000 based on probate records from husband's estate. Widowed 2 years ago, husband died of heart attack, owned rural property worth $280,000, had pension and social security income, power of attorney granted to Marcus Webb 7 months ago. Recent changes to her will, discovered through county records. Eleanor Patterson, age 75, widowed 14 months ago, home valued at $290,000, retirement accounts estimated $380,000, power of attorney to Marcus Webb 6 months ago. Ruth Davidson, age 79, widowed 19 months ago, property worth $310,000. Substantial savings. Power of attorney to Marcus Webb 8 months ago. Multiple large gifts to Marcus Webb documented in financial records. Helen Morrison, age 82, widowed 22 months ago. Estate valued over $500,000. Power of attorney to Marcus Webb 5 months ago. Recently changed beneficiary on life insurance to Marcus Webb. Sylvia Chen, age 77, widowed 10 months ago. Property and savings worth approximately $420,000. Power of attorney to Marcus Webb 4 months ago. Bank withdrawals totaling over $60,000 in past months. The pattern was unmistakable. Marcus Webb was systematically targeting recently widowed elderly women, gaining their trust, securing power of attorney, and then draining their assets while keeping them medicated and isolated. This is predatory financial exploitation on a massive scale, Linda told Detective Sarah Chen of the Twin Falls Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. Marcus Webb has gained financial control over 6 vulnerable elderly women and appears to be stealing their life savings. The pharmacist's observation about the medication suggests he may also be over-medicating them to keep them compliant and confused. Detective Chen ran a background check on Marcus Webb. What emerged was a history of precisely this type of predatory behavior. Marcus Webb, age 46, no criminal convictions but multiple civil judgments against him. 2015, sued by family of elderly woman in Oregon for financial exploitation, settled out of court. 2017, investigated in Washington state for similar pattern with 2 elderly women, insufficient evidence for prosecution. 2019, restraining order filed by family members of elderly woman in Montana. Webb had gained power of attorney and was draining accounts. 2021, moved to Idaho. Webb is a professional predator, Detective Chen told her team. He targets recently widowed elderly women in their 70s and 80s. He befriends them, gains their trust, presents himself as a caring helper, gets power of attorney and then systematically steals everything they have. He's done this in multiple states. Each time families eventually catch on, but by then much of the money is gone. He settles civil suits or moves to a new state before criminal charges can be filed. How does he find his victims? Asked Detective James Park. He monitors obituaries, Chen explained. He identifies elderly widows, then engineers chance meetings at grocery stores, senior centers, churches. He's charming, helpful, gradually becomes indispensable. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, he has complete financial control. And the medications? Park asked. That's the new element the pharmacist identified. Webb apparently keeps his victims heavily medicated, presumably to make them confused, compliant, and unable to recognize they're being robbed. The opioids and benzodiazepines create cognitive impairment that looks like dementia. Families and doctors might think the elderly woman is just declining naturally, when actually she's being drugged. This added a disturbing dimension beyond financial exploitation. If Webb was deliberately over-medicating elderly women, he was committing assault, potentially causing permanent harm, and possibly even hastening their deaths. We need to move carefully, Detective Chen said. Webb has power of attorney over these women, which gives him legal authority to manage their finances and medical care. We need evidence that he's abusing that authority, stealing from them, and harming them through over-medication. We should coordinate with APS to do welfare checks on all 6 women. Over the next week, APS investigator Linda Martinez visited all 6 women, conducting welfare checks under the guise of routine follow-ups. What she found was deeply troubling. Linda Martinez's first visit was to Dorothy Webb's home, a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Twin Falls. Marcus Webb answered the door with his characteristic friendly demeanor. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked pleasantly. "I'm Linda Martinez from Adult Protective Services. I'm here to conduct a routine welfare check on Dorothy Webb." Marcus's smile tightened slightly. "Is there a problem?" "Dorothy's fine. She's resting right now. She doesn't do well with unexpected visitors. I still need to see her and speak with her briefly. It's standard protocol." Reluctantly, Marcus allowed Linda inside. The house was clean and well maintained, no obvious signs of neglect. But Linda noticed prescription bottles lined up on the kitchen counter. OxyContin, Xanax, Ambien, plus various other medications. Far more bottles than one person should need. The elderly woman looked frail, confused and sedated. "Dorothy, this is Miss Martinez from Social Services," Marcus said loudly, as if Dorothy were hard of hearing. "She's here to check on you." "Hello, Dorothy," Linda said gently, kneeling beside the recliner. "How are you feeling today?" Dorothy looked at Linda with unfocused eyes. I'm fine. Who are you?" "I'm Linda from Adult Protective Services. I'm here to make sure you're okay and getting proper care." Dorothy seemed confused. "Marcus takes care of me.
I'm her husband, Marcus interjected quickly. Dorothy gets confused sometimes. Early dementia. I handle everything for her. Dorothy, can I speak with you privately for a few minutes? Linda asked. That's not a good idea, Marcus said. She gets agitated without me present. Her doctor recommended I stay with her during interactions because she finds it upsetting to talk to strangers alone. Classic isolation tactic. Prevent the victim from speaking privately to anyone who might recognize abuse. I still need to speak with Dorothy alone, Linda insisted firmly. That's APS protocol. Just a few minutes, Marcus. Marcus looked like he wanted to refuse, but legally, Linda had the authority to interview Dorothy privately. Reluctantly, he left the room. Once Marcus was gone, Linda spoke quietly to Dorothy. Dorothy, I need to ask you some questions. You're safe. You can tell me the truth. Are you being well cared for? Dorothy seemed to struggle to focus. Marcus, he helps me. After George died, I was so alone. Marcus has been so helpful. When did you meet Marcus? I don't. Maybe a year ago. After George died. At the grocery store. He helped me carry bags. He was so kind. Dorothy, do you take a lot of medications? Marcus gives me my pills. Morning and night. So many pills. Do you know what all the pills are for? Dorothy looked confused. Pain, I think. And, I don't remember. Marcus knows. He handles everything. How do you feel? Are you in pain? I'm tired. Always so tired. And confused. I can't think clearly anymore. Linda suspected Dorothy was being over-medicated into a constant state of sedation and confusion. Dorothy, have you signed papers giving Marcus control of your finances? Papers? I don't. Maybe. Marcus said I needed to sign things for my bills to be paid. I trust Marcus. He takes care of me. Do you know how much money you have? Do you see your bank statements? Marcus handles all that. I don't worry about money anymore. This pattern repeated across all 6 women. Each was sedated and confused, likely from over-medication, isolated from family, friends and independent medical care, financially dependent on Marcus, despite having their own substantial assets, trusting Marcus completely, having been conditioned to depend on him. None of the women could articulate what medications they were taking, or why. None had independent access to their bank accounts, or financial records. None had family or friends visiting regularly. All believed Marcus was a devoted caregiver, unaware he was systematically robbing them. Detective Sarah Chen and her team built a comprehensive case against Marcus Webb, documenting the systematic exploitation of 6 elderly women. Financial evidence. Forensic accountants examined the financial records of all 6 victims. The pattern was consistent across each. Marcus gained power of attorney within months of meeting each woman. Large cash withdrawals began immediately after power of attorney was granted. Gifts and loans to Marcus totaling tens of thousands per victim. Checks written to Marcus for vague services and care expenses. Transfers of assets. Beneficiary changes on insurance policies and investments. Depletion of savings accounts. Collectively, Marcus had stolen or misappropriated over $680,000 from the 6 women in less than a year. Webb operates like a financial vampire, explained forensic accountant Jennifer Park. He identifies a victim, gains financial control, then steadily drains every asset. Cash withdrawals, forged checks, transfers disguised as gifts or payments for care, changes to beneficiaries so he inherits when the victim dies. By the time family members notice, most of the money is gone. Medical evidence. Dr. Patricia Santos, a geriatric medicine specialist, reviewed the medication records David Kim had provided. Her assessment was damning. These 6 women are being systematically over-medicated with dangerous combinations of opioids, benzodiazepines, and sedatives. The dosages are excessive for their documented medical conditions. The combinations create severe cognitive impairment, sedation, and increased fall risk. This isn't appropriate medical care. This is deliberate pharmacological control to keep victims confused and compliant. Dr. Santos examined each woman with court authorization during the investigation. Her findings, RON 6, showed signs of over-medication, confusion, excessive sedation, cognitive impairment. None had medical conditions severe enough to warrant the high-dose opioids prescribed. Several had injuries, bruises, falls consistent with sedation side effects. Cognitive testing showed impairment that improved when medications were temporarily reduced. None of the women were receiving proper medical monitoring for the dangerous drug combination. Webb was essentially drugging these women into submission, Dr. Santos testified. He controlled their medications, ensured they remained confused and dependent, and prevented them from having lucid interactions with doctors, family, or anyone who might recognize they were being exploited. Pattern evidence. Detective Chen documented Webb's history. RON. At least 11 elderly women exploited across 4 states over 10 years. Similar pattern in each case. Befriend recent widow. Gain trust. Secure power of attorney. Drain assets. Multiple civil lawsuits settled before criminal prosecution. Evidence of deliberate targeting, obituary monitoring, senior center attendance, church visits. Webb is a professional predator, Chen told the prosecutor. This isn't opportunistic theft. It's a calculated, repeated pattern of identifying and exploiting vulnerable elderly women. The medication element he's added in Idaho makes it even more egregious. He's not just stealing, he's drugging his victims to facilitate the theft. The pharmacist's testimony. David Kim's observations were crucial evidence linking all 6 cases together. I noticed the same man, Marcus Webb, picking up controlled substances for 6 different elderly women over 6 months. David would later testify. Each time he claimed the woman was his wife, but they had different last names and addresses. The medications were powerful opioids and sedatives in concerning quantities and combinations. The pattern indicated either diversion or deliberate over-medication of vulnerable people. I reported my concerns to Adult Protective Services and the prescribing physicians. That report triggered the investigation that exposed Webb's exploitation scheme. David's professional observation and willingness to report suspicious patterns had been the key to uncovering Webb's crimes. Without the pharmacist connecting the dots across multiple victims, Webb might have continued exploiting elderly women indefinitely. Based on overwhelming evidence, Detective Sarah Chen obtained arrest warrants for Marcus Webb on multiple charges. Criminal charges: 6 counts of theft by deception, felony; 6 counts of forgery, forging victim signatures on financial documents; 6 counts of assault, the deliberate over-medication constituted assault; abuse of power of attorney; conspiracy to commit fraud; multiple counts of insurance fraud. Webb faced over 100 years in prison if convicted on all counts. The arrest was coordinated carefully. Police wanted to catch Webb with evidence and ensure the 6 victims were immediately protected. On a Wednesday morning, Detective Chen and her team executed search warrants simultaneously at Webb's residence and at the homes of all 6 victims. Webb was arrested at Dorothy Webb's house, where he'd been staying overnight. Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and related charges, Detective Chen said, handcuffing Webb. You have the right to remain silent. Webb's confident facade crumbled. This is a misunderstanding. I've been caring for these women. They're like family to me. They gave me gifts voluntarily because they appreciate my help. We'll let a jury decide that, Chen said. Search warrants revealed extensive evidence of Webb's schemes. At Webb's residence, detailed notes on each victim, financial assets, family relationships, vulnerabilities, copies of power of attorney documents, forged signatures on checks and financial documents, lists of obituaries with notes identifying potential targets, bank records showing deposits corresponding to thefts from victims, computer files with research on exploiting elderly people and evading prosecution. Webb kept meticulous records of his crimes, Chen noted. He documented everything, which actually makes our prosecution easier. At victims' homes, medication bottles showing excessive quantities, financial documents Webb had kept hidden from victim, evidence of isolation, disconnected phones, hidden mail, restricted access. All 6 women were immediately placed under protective orders. New caregivers were assigned. Their medications were reviewed and adjusted by independent physicians. Family members were contacted and brought in to help. As the 6 elderly women's medications were properly managed and reduced to appropriate levels, a remarkable transformation occurred. The confusion and cognitive impairment that families had attributed to dementia or age began clearing up. Dorothy Webb's awakening. Dorothy, who'd seemed profoundly confused during Linda Martinez's initial welfare check, became increasingly lucid as Dr. Santos reduced her medications to appropriate therapeutic levels. Where's Marcus? Dorothy asked 3 days after her medications were adjusted, her eyes clearer than they'd been in months. Marcus has been arrested, Linda explained gently. Dorothy, we need to talk to you about what's been happening. As Linda explained the exploitation scheme, the stolen money, the deliberate over-medication, the power of attorney abuse, Dorothy's reaction shifted from disbelief to horror to grief. He seemed so kind, Dorothy said, crying. After George died, I was so alone. Marcus appeared like an angel, helping with groceries, driving me to appointments, keeping me company. I trusted him completely. He said he loved me like a mother, and all along he was stealing from me, drugging me. I'm so sorry this happened to you, Linda said. But you're safe now. Your daughter is flying in from Seattle. We're going to help you recover from this. Dorothy's daughter, Susan, was shocked when she saw her mother lucid for the first time in months. Mum seems like herself again, Susan told Dr. Santos. For the past 6 months, when I'd call, Mum was so confused I thought she had severe dementia. Marcus told me Mum's condition was deteriorating rapidly. He said visits upset her, so I should stay away. I trusted him. I thought he was caring for my mother. Instead, he was drugging her and stealing her money. How much did he take? Financial analysis showed Marcus had stolen approximately $127,000 from Dorothy through various means: cash withdrawals, forged checks, transfers disguised as gifts, Some of the money may be recoverable, Detective Chen explained. We've frozen Marcus's accounts and are tracing the stolen funds, but realistically, much of it has been spent. I'm sorry, similar awakenings occurred with all 6 women. As their medications were properly managed, their cognitive function improved dramatically. They all expressed shock, betrayal, grief, and anger at having been exploited by someone they trusted.
Marcus Webb's trial began 9 months after his arrest. The prosecution's case was comprehensive and damning. Lead prosecutor Robert Martinez methodically presented evidence of Webb's systematic exploitation, pattern evidence. Marcus Webb is a predator who specifically targets vulnerable elderly widows, Martinez told the jury in opening statements. He monitors obituaries to identify recent widows. He engineers meetings that seem coincidental. He presents himself as a kind, helpful friend. He gains the victim's trust, he secures power of attorney, and then he systematically steals everything they have while keeping them drugged and confused so they don't realize what's happening. Martinez presented evidence of Webb's decade-long pattern across multiple states, showing this wasn't an isolated incident but a refined criminal scheme Webb had perfected over years. David Kim's testimony. The pharmacist who'd first noticed the suspicious pattern testified about his observations. Over 6 months, I observed Marcus Webb picking up prescriptions for 6 different elderly women, David testified. Each time he claimed the woman was his wife, but they had different last names and lived at different addresses. The medications were high-dose opioids and sedatives in dangerous combinations and excessive quantities. As a pharmacist, I'm trained to recognize concerning patterns with controlled substances. This pattern indicated either medication diversion or deliberate over-medication of vulnerable people. I reported my concerns to Adult Protective Services and the prescribing physicians. Mr. Kim, what made you suspicious enough to investigate further and report? Prosecutor Martinez asked. The pattern didn't make medical or logical sense, David explained. 6 different wives in 6 months, all elderly, all on similar dangerous medication combinations, all picking up prescriptions more frequently than appropriate. Individual transactions appeared legal, but the pattern revealed something wrong. Pharmacists are the last checkpoint before medications reach patients. We have a responsibility to notice patterns that suggest abuse, diversion, or danger. Medical expert testimony. Dr. Patricia Santos testified about the deliberate over-medication scheme. These 6 women were being systematically drugged with excessive doses of opioids, benzodiazepines, and sedatives. Dr. Santos testified, the medication combinations created severe cognitive impairment, confusion, memory problems, sedation. None of the women had medical conditions severe enough to warrant these dangerous prescriptions. When I evaluated them during the investigation and adjusted their medications to appropriate levels, their cognitive function improved dramatically. What families had believed was dementia was actually pharmacological impairment, deliberately created and maintained by Mr. Webb. Why would Mr. Webb want to keep these women confused and sedated? Martinez asked. To control them, Dr. Santos said. Confused, sedated people can't track their finances, can't question suspicious transactions, can't report exploitation. They become completely dependent on their caregiver. It's a form of chemical restraint, using drugs to control someone's behavior and prevent them from recognizing or reporting abuse. Victims' testimony. All 6 elderly women testified, describing how Webb had targeted them, gained their trust and exploited them. Dorothy Webb. After my husband died, I was devastated and alone. Marcus appeared in my life like a gift from God, kind, helpful, attentive. He helped with groceries, drove me to appointments, kept me company. I came to depend on him completely. When he suggested I sign power of attorney so he could help manage my bills and medical care, it seemed reasonable. I trusted him. I never imagined he was stealing from me. I never realized the medications he was giving me were keeping me confused and unable to think clearly. Margaret Harrison. Marcus told me he loved me like a mother. He said he wanted to take care of me in my final years. I believed him. I gave him access to my finances. I let him manage my medications. I signed documents he put in front of me without reading them carefully because I trusted him. I didn't know he was forging my signature on checks, withdrawing my savings, and keeping me drugged so I wouldn't notice. Each victim's testimony painted the same picture: Webb as a calculating predator who systematically identified, targeted, and exploited vulnerable elderly women. Financial evidence: forensic accountants detailed the systematic theft, trauma audits, total stolen, approximately $680,000 from 6 victims. Methods: cash withdrawals, forged checks, fraudulent transfers, changed beneficiaries. Timeline: exploitation began within weeks of gaining power of attorney for each victim. Pattern: consistent across all 6 victims, showing deliberate scheme rather than isolated incidents. Defense strategy: Webb's defense attorney attempted to portray Webb as a well-meaning caregiver who'd made poor financial decisions but hadn't intended to steal. Marcus Webb genuinely cared for these elderly women. Defense attorney Thomas Park argued he provided care and companionship. The women voluntarily gave him power of attorney and made gifts to him out of gratitude. Yes, he made mistakes with financial management. Yes, he should have been more careful. But this wasn't theft, it was poor judgment by someone trying to help. But the prosecution demolished this defense with evidence showing Webb's history of identical schemes in multiple states, his deliberate targeting of victims through obituary monitoring, his meticulous notes documenting victims' assets and vulnerabilities, the systematic over-medication scheme designed to keep victims confused, forged signatures on financial documents, attempts to hide the exploitation from victims' families. This wasn't poor judgment, Prosecutor Martinez argued in closing. This was calculated, premeditated, systematic financial predation. Webb spent a decade perfecting his scheme. He targeted vulnerable widows, gained their trust through deception, secured financial control, kept them drugged and confused, stole everything they had, and moved on to new victims. He did this to at least 11 women across 4 states that we know of, likely many more. He's not a misguided caregiver. He's a professional predator who views elderly widows as resources to be exploited. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 38 counts. Webb showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. At sentencing, all 6 victims provided impact statements describing how Webb's exploitation had affected their lives. Dorothy Webb: Marcus Webb stole my money, but that's not the worst thing he did to me. He stole my dignity. He stole months of my life that I spent in a drugged fog. He destroyed my ability to trust. After my husband died, I was vulnerable and grieving. Marcus saw that vulnerability as an opportunity to exploit. He pretended to care about me while systematically robbing me and drugging me into confusion. My daughter thought I had dementia. She thought I was losing my mind. But it wasn't dementia. It was Marcus deliberately over-medicating me so I couldn't think clearly enough to realize what he was doing. When the medications were properly adjusted after his arrest, my mind cleared. I realized I'd lost almost a year of lucid life because Marcus was keeping me chemically impaired. He stole $127,000 from me, money my late husband and I had saved over 40 years of marriage. That money was supposed to secure my future, maybe leave something for my daughter and grandchildren. Instead, Marcus took it to fund his lifestyle while pretending to be my devoted caregiver. I want Marcus Webb in prison for a long time. Not just to punish him, but to protect other elderly widows from becoming his victims. He's done this before. He'll do it again if given the chance. He needs to be stopped permanently. Margaret Harrison: I'm 81 years old. My husband died 2 years ago after 56 years of marriage. I was lost without him. Marcus Webb saw my grief and loneliness as an opportunity. He befriended me, helped me, made me dependent on him, then robbed me blind. Marcus took $98,000 from me, but more than the money, he took my independence. He isolated me from my friends and family. He convinced me I needed him for everything. He kept me so medicated, I could barely function. My son flew in from Boston to visit, and Marcus turned him away, telling him I was having a bad day and visitors upset me. My son believed him and left. I didn't even know my own son had tried to visit me. Marcus made me doubt my own mind. When I'd notice money missing or couldn't remember things, he'd tell me I was getting confused, that it was normal for someone my age. He gaslit me into thinking I was losing my mental capacity, when really, he was drugging me and stealing from me. I'll never get back the time I lost in that medicated fog. I'll never fully recover financially, but I can help ensure Marcus never does this to another elderly widow. I want the maximum sentence possible. Eleanor Patterson: after my husband passed away, I was so lonely I couldn't bear it.
when Marcus started coming around helping with yard work, driving me to appointments, keeping me company, I thought God had sent me an angel. Instead, he was a devil in disguise. Marcus didn't just steal my savings, he stole my self-respect. He made me completely dependent on him, then used that dependency to rob me. He convinced me to sign papers I didn't understand. He told me the medications would help me not worry so much, but really they kept me too confused to protect myself. I lost $73,000 to Marcus Webb. That represents 30 years of careful saving. My husband was a school teacher. We never had much, but we saved what we could. Marcus took it all in less than 6 months. What haunts me most is how completely I trusted him. I would have trusted him with my life. And all along he saw me as nothing more than a bank account to drain. That betrayal cuts deeper than the financial loss. Ruth Davidson, Marcus Webb is a predator who specifically hunts grieving widows. He watched the obituaries, found my husband's death notice, and targeted me deliberately. Everything about our friendship was calculated and false. Marcus stole $112,000 from me through forged checks, fraudulent transfers, and manipulated gifts. But the financial theft isn't the worst part. The worst part is the violation of trust. I invited this man into my home. I trusted him with my health, my finances, my well-being. He exploited that trust ruthlessly. The medications Marcus gave me kept me in a constant fog. I thought I was developing Alzheimer's like my mother had. I was terrified of losing my mind. But it wasn't Alzheimer's. It was Marcus deliberately over-medicating me, so I couldn't think clearly. When proper doctors adjusted my medications after Marcus's arrest, my mind cleared completely. I don't have dementia. I was being drugged. Marcus Webb deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison. He's a calculating criminal who's destroyed the lives of multiple elderly women. He will never stop unless he's stopped by incarceration. Helen Morrison, I'm 82 years old. I thought I'd spend my final years peacefully, enjoying my grandchildren, living off the nest egg my husband and I had built together. Instead, I spent months in a drugged stupor, while Marcus Webb systematically stole everything we'd worked for. Marcus took $156,000 from me, the most of any victim. He also changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy to himself. If I had died while under his care, which was likely given the dangerous medication combinations he had me on, he would have collected $200,000 more. I believe Marcus was positioning himself to benefit from my death. The medications he was giving me could have killed me through respiratory depression or falls. My children thought I was losing my mental faculties. They had difficult conversations about nursing homes and memory care. But I wasn't declining. I was being poisoned with excessive medications by a man stealing my life savings. Marcus Webb is evil. He preys on widows at their most vulnerable. He's destroyed multiple families. He needs to be locked away forever. Sylvia Chen, my husband died 10 months ago. We'd been married for 53 years. I was devastated. Marcus Webb saw my grief and saw dollar signs. Marcus stole $94,000 from me in just 4 months, the shortest duration of any victim, but he worked fast once he had access. He was aggressive about draining my accounts, as if he knew his time was limited. The pharmacist who reported him, David Kim, saved my life. Marcus had me on such high doses of opioids and sedatives that my doctor later told me I was at extreme risk of fatal overdose. The medication combinations could have killed me at any time. Whether Marcus intended that or not, I don't know, but I know I'm alive today because a pharmacist paid attention to a pattern and reported his concerns. I want Marcus Webb imprisoned for life. He's a serial predator who will continue victimizing elderly widows if he's ever released. He's shown no remorse, no recognition of the harm he's caused. He's a danger to every vulnerable elderly person. Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the extensive evidence, the victim impact statements, and the sentencing recommendations before addressing Marcus Webb. Mr. Webb, you are one of the most calculating and predatory criminals to appear in this courtroom. Over at least a decade, you've systematically targeted, befriended, and exploited vulnerable elderly widows across multiple states. You refined your technique with each victim, learning how to more effectively gain trust, secure financial control, and drain assets, while keeping victims too confused to recognize what was happening. The 6 victims in this case represent just a fraction of the elderly people you've exploited. Evidence suggests at least 11 victims across 4 states, and likely many more who never came forward or whose families never realized their loved one had been victimized. Your scheme was sophisticated and cruel. You monitored obituaries to identify recent widows. You engineered accidental meetings. You presented yourself as a caring friend and helper. You isolated victims from family and friends who might recognize the exploitation. You secured power of attorney under false pretenses. And then you systematically stole everything these women had while deliberately over-medicating them to keep them confused and compliant. The over-medication element is particularly heinous. You weren't just stealing money, you were chemically restraining these women, destroying their cognitive function, putting them at risk of fatal overdose, and stealing months or years of their lives that they spent in a drugged fog. Several victims' families believed their loved ones had dementia, when in fact the women were being deliberately drugged by you. You stole approximately $680,000 from 6 victims in less than a year, but the financial loss doesn't capture the full harm. You stole these women's independence, dignity, and trust. You violated them at their most vulnerable moment, after losing their life partners. You destroyed families' faith in caregiving, and made it harder for legitimate caregivers to be trusted. You've shown absolutely no remorse. Even during trial, you maintained that you were a devoted caregiver, and the victims voluntarily gave you money. You showed no recognition of the profound harm you caused. This demonstrates you would reoffend immediately, if given opportunity. The prosecution has requested consecutive sentences on all counts. I'm granting that request. Judge Morrison sentenced Marcus Webb to, on trot, 6 counts of financial exploitation, 15 years each, 90 years total, 6 counts of theft, 10 years each, 60 years total, 6 counts of forgery, 5 years each, 30 years total, 6 counts of forgery, 5 years each, 30 years total, 6 counts of forgery, 5 years each, 30 years total, 6 counts of forgery, 5 years each, 30 years total, 6 counts of forgery, 5 years each, 30 years total, 6 counts of forgery, 5 years each, 30 years total, 6 counts of forgery, 5 years each, 30 years total, 6 counts of forge, 5 years each, 5 years total stiaf, 5 years each, Fondry Bottolt stiaf, Fondry Bottolt stiaf, 5 years each, Fondry Bottolt stiaf, 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 Fondry 6 counts of assault, 8 years each, 48 years total, Fondry Bottolt stiaf, Fondry Bottolt stiaf, Fondry Bottolt stiaf, 40 years to state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 40 years. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison, Mr. Webb. You will never again have the opportunity to exploit vulnerable elderly people. Society is permanently protected from your predatory behavior. Webb was led from the courtroom in shackles, showing no emotion, even as he faced spending the rest of his life in prison. David Kim found himself processing an experience that had revealed a side of his profession he'd never fully appreciated before noticing Marcus Webb's suspicious pattern. I've been a pharmacist for 17 years, David told a conference of pharmacy professionals 6 months after Webb's conviction. I always understood my role was about ensuring medication safety, checking for interactions, counseling patients, verifying dosages, but Marcus Webb's case taught me that pharmacists are also positioned to recognize patterns of abuse and exploitation that others might miss. David described how he'd noticed Webb picking up prescriptions for 6 different elderly women over 6 months, each time claiming the woman was his wife. Individual transactions appeared legitimate, David explained. Valid prescriptions from licensed doctors, proper identification provided, everything technically legal. But when I looked at the pattern, the same man collecting controlled substances for 6 different elderly women, all on similar dangerous medication combinations, it revealed something deeply wrong that individual prescriptions didn't show. David's decision to report his concerns to Adult Protective Services and prescribing physicians had triggered the investigation that ultimately exposed Webb's decade-long exploitation scheme. I worried about reporting, David admitted. What if I was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation? What if I was invading patients' privacy or overstepping my role? But I decided that the potential harm of not reporting outweighed the discomfort of potentially being wrong. If Webb was exploiting these women, they needed help. If I was mistaken, the investigation would reveal that, and no harm would be done. David's observation and willingness to report had saved 6 elderly women from continued exploitation and potentially saved their lives, given the dangerous medication combinations Webb had them on. Pharmacists see patterns that individual doctors don't see, David told the conference. We fill prescriptions from multiple providers. We track controlled substances across different patients and prescribers. We're uniquely positioned to notice when something doesn't add up, when medications don't match conditions, when someone is doctor shopping, when a caregiver's behavior suggests abuse or diversion. David worked with professional pharmacy organizations to develop training programs, teaching pharmacists to recognize elder exploitation red flags, warning signs for pharmacists, prescription patterns, same person picking up controlled substances for multiple unrelated patients, excessive quantities or dangerous combinations, prescriptions from multiple doctors who aren't coordinating care, refills requested more frequently than appropriate, changes in prescribing patterns after new caregiver enters picture, behavioral indicators, refill queue prevents patient from speaking with pharmacist, poor
for making optibrita reckoning patients with drug-controlled substances test optibrita fixate when different doctor corn with powers common from point to appropriate with powers common from point to powers behavioral indicators within 4 feet optibrita to be tops with pharmacy organizations to develop training programs teaching pharmacists to recognize elder exploitation red flags by pharmacy organizations with powers common from point to be got tops with his intimate ones protected scoring storage to fifto propaganda adult to best perspective because me just Mr. British this guilt is the tourist this metal stories caregiver who answers all questions for patient but guilt is just parachute talks is based off trauma from Zoigo and T-Stocks plus my house and sustankers reach house comes is corneo this thinker of this vexels to rifstals for funding insurance tracking plus takes insurance being maxed out with excessive prescriptions for flooding insurance tracking plus thinker of flooding skelter for flooding foreign trotting scantals these stops fast live blips develop track bliskets with blind forward for blipsy plus thinker of flooding tron to of course plus thinker of flooding forth plus thinker of flooding forth the flooding four off to kids the flayed to car feet forcing plus thinker of flooding falls plus get us counted offense at Shoak plus thinker of flooding forth plus get us counted offense at Shoak plus get us counted offense at Shoak plus thinker of flooding forth plus thinker of flooding forth plus get us counted offense at Shoak plus get us counted offense at Shoak plus get us counted offense at Shoak plus thinker of flooding forth plus get us counted offense at Shoak 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 plus get us grays of building forth plus get forth each list in 50 plus get us grays of building forth plus get us grays of building forth plus get us consult with prescribing physicians about patterns report concerns to adult protective services plus contact law enforcement if criminal activity suspected trust professional instincts when something seems wrong we're not investigators and we're not social workers David emphasized but we are healthcare professionals with a responsibility to protect patients when we notice patterns suggesting abuse exploitation or danger we must report our concerns to appropriate authorities and let them investigate David's training program reached over 50,000 pharmacists and led to dozens of cases where pharmacists noticed suspicious prescription patterns and reported them, resulting in investigations that helped vulnerable people. Marcus Webb's case sparked reforms in how the healthcare system and financial institutions protect elderly people from exploitation. Pharmacy monitoring systems. Idaho implemented enhanced prescription monitoring program. PMP features specifically designed to flag patterns like Webb's. RONs referencing prescriptions picked up by the same person for multiple patients, or automatic alerts when dangerous medication combinations are prescribed, flagging when elderly patients suddenly receive high-dose controlled substances from new providers, required pharmacist review when concerning patterns emerge. Webb operated for months before being noticed because no system was cross-referencing prescriptions he picked up for different women, explained Idaho Board of Pharmacy Director Robert Martinez. The enhanced PMP creates automatic alerts when patterns suggest possible diversion or abuse. Pharmacists still make the professional judgment about whether to investigate, but the system helps them notice patterns they might otherwise miss. Power of attorney safeguards. Idaho implemented new requirements for power of attorney documents involving elderly or vulnerable individuals. Mandatory independent review. Attorney must meet privately with elderly person to ensure they understand what they're signing. Attorney must confirm elderly person isn't being coerced or manipulated. Ongoing monitoring. Financial institutions must provide quarterly statements to elderly person and a designated third-party monitor. Suspicious financial activity must be reported to Adult Protective Services. Annual review required to ensure POA is still appropriate and not being abused. Revocation rights. Simplified process for elderly person or family members to revoke POA if abuse suspected. Emergency revocation available through Adult Protective Services pending investigation. Webb gained power of attorney over 6 women and immediately began draining their accounts, explained elder law attorney Jennifer Park. The new safeguards make it harder for predators to gain financial control and easier to detect when power of attorney is being abused. Idaho required all healthcare providers to complete training on recognizing financial exploitation and over-medication of elderly patients. Red flags for physicians. Sudden requests for high-dose controlled substances from previously stable patient. New caregiver who controls all communication with patient. Patient who appears over-sedated or cognitively impaired when previously lucid. Caregiver who prevents private conversations with patient. Patient isolated from family without clear medical reason. Required actions. Private examination of elderly patients without caregiver present. Consultation with other providers to check for medication conflicts. Report concerns to Adult Protective Services when exploitation suspected. Document observations that might indicate abuse. Several doctors prescribed the medications Webb used to keep his victims confused, said Medical Board Director Dr. Patricia Santos. The doctors didn't realize they were part of a scheme because they only saw their individual patient, not the pattern across multiple victims. Better training helps providers recognize when they might be unwittingly facilitating abuse. Community awareness. Public education campaigns taught communities to recognize and report elder exploitation. Warning signs. Elderly person suddenly isolated from family and friends. New friend or caregiver who quickly becomes indispensable. Unexplained financial transactions or asset transfers. Elderly person appears confused or over-medicated. Caregiver who answers all questions for elderly person. Changes to wills, beneficiaries, or POA documents after new person enters life. How to help. Elderly person. Stay connected with elderly friends, neighbors, family members. Question sudden changes in elderly person's functioning or finances. Report concerns to Adult Protective Services. Offer to help elderly people review financial documents and decisions. Create community networks that check on vulnerable elderly residents. Webb succeeded because his victims were isolated, explained APS Director Linda Martinez. He deliberately cut them off from family and friends who might notice the exploitation. Connected communities where people watch out for vulnerable neighbors make it much harder for predators like Webb to operate. The 6 elderly women Webb exploited faced long roads to financial and psychological recovery. Financial recovery. Recovering stolen funds proved challenging. Webb had spent much of the money on luxury items, travel and living expenses. Asset recovery specialists traced what they could. Webb's bank accounts, frozen upon arrest, $67,000 recovered. Webb's vehicle and personal property, seized and sold, $42,000 recovered. Insurance policies where Webb was fraudulent beneficiary, $180,000 recovered. Criminal restitution order, $680,000, though collecting would be nearly impossible with Webb imprisoned. Total recovered, approximately $289,000, $580,000 stolen, about 42% recovery rate. Recovering stolen assets from exploitation cases is always difficult, explained victim compensation attorney Michael Park. Most of the money has been spent. What we can recover is whatever the perpetrator still possesses, bank accounts, property, vehicles, but it's rarely the full amount stolen. Each victim also received compensation from Idaho's Crime Victim Compensation Fund, though amounts were limited and didn't replace everything stolen. Psychological recovery. All 6 women worked with therapists specializing in elder abuse recovery. The psychological impacts were profound. Violated trust. I trusted Marcus completely, Dorothy Webb told her therapist. I welcomed him into my home, my life, my finances. That trust was weaponized against me. Now I struggle to trust anyone. My new caregiver is wonderful and carefully vetted, but I find myself suspicious of every kindness, wondering if there's an ulterior motive. Webb destroyed my ability to accept help without fear. Stolen time. I lost almost a year of my life to that drugged fog, Margaret Harrison reflected. A year I'll never get back. A year where I was barely present for my grandchildren, where I missed holidays and birthdays because I was too medicated to function. Webb didn't just steal my money, he stole irreplaceable time. Damaged family relationships. My children thought I was losing my mind, Eleanor Patterson said. They had painful conversations about my declining mental state and whether I needed memory care. They doubted my competence. Those doubts were created by Webb's deliberate over-medication, but the damage to our relationships lingers. My children now second-guess my decisions and treat me as more fragile than I am. Loss of independence. I was proud of my independence, Ruth Davidson explained. I'd lived alone successfully for years after my husband died. Webb made me completely dependent on him, then used that dependency to rob me. Now I question my ability to live independently. What if I'm vulnerable to another predator? What if I can't trust my judgment? Webb took my confidence along with my money. Despite these challenges, all 6 women showed remarkable resilience. With proper support, therapy, and restored medication management, they gradually rebuilt their lives.
5 years after David Kim noticed Marcus Webb's suspicious prescription pattern, the case remained a touchstone for discussions about elder exploitation and the importance of professional vigilance. David, now 46 and Director of Pharmacy Services for a regional healthcare system, continued advocating for pharmacist awareness of exploitation patterns. 5 years ago, I noticed a pattern that didn't make sense. One man picking up controlled substances for 6 different elderly wives, David told a healthcare conference. That observation led to exposing a predator who'd been exploiting elderly widows for over a decade. It taught me that healthcare professionals must look beyond individual transactions to recognize patterns that indicate abuse. David's training program had reached over 150,000 pharmacy professionals and had led to 127 documented cases where pharmacists noticed suspicious patterns and reported them, resulting in elder abuse investigations and interventions. Not every suspicious pattern turns out to be exploitation, David noted. Sometimes there are innocent explanations, but it's always worth investigating. Better to check and be wrong than to ignore warning signs and allow abuse to continue. David maintained contact with the 6 women Webb had exploited, checking in periodically to see how they were recovering. The survivors 5 years later, Dorothy Webb, now 83, had recovered financially with help from family and asset recovery, living independently with appropriate care support, active in her church and community, advocate for elder abuse awareness. Marcus Webb tried to destroy me, but I refused to be destroyed, Dorothy said. I lost money and time, but I rebuilt my life. I'm grateful to David Kim for noticing something was wrong and reporting it. His vigilance saved me from continued exploitation and possibly saved my life. Margaret Harrison, now 86, moved to an assisted living facility near her son in Boston, financially stable after partial asset recovery and family support, enjoying regular visits with grandchildren. I'm more cautious about trust now, Margaret reflected, but I haven't let Webb's betrayal make me bitter. I've found good people to help me, and I'm living a good life despite what he did. Eleanor Patterson, now 80, living with her daughter's family, financially recovered with family assistance, volunteering at senior center to help other elderly people recognize exploitation warning signs. I use my experience to educate others, Eleanor explained. If my story helps even one elderly person recognize they're being exploited and seek help, then something good came from my suffering. Ruth Davidson, now 84, living independently with proper care support, financially stable, involved in advocacy for stronger elder protection laws. Webb stole from me, but he didn't break me, Ruth said. I'm using my voice to push for changes that protect vulnerable elderly people from predators like him. Helen Morrison, now 87, living in an active senior community, most financially recovered of all victims due to insurance policy recovery and family support, advocate for pharmacy monitoring systems. The pharmacist who noticed Webb's pattern saved multiple lives, Helen said. Healthcare professionals who pay attention and report concerns are heroes. David Kim is my hero. Sylvia Chen, now 82, living with family, financially recovered with help from relatives. Grateful for David Kim's intervention. David saved my life, Sylvia said simply. The medications Webb had me on could have killed me. David noticed, reported, and stopped it. I'll be grateful forever. Marcus Webb remained in state prison serving his 265-year sentence. He'd made unsuccessful appeals and would spend the rest of his life incarcerated. During his 5 years in prison, authorities had identified 3 additional elderly victims Webb had exploited in earlier schemes, bringing his known victim count to at least 9 women, with total thefts exceeding $900,000. A decade after David Kim noticed an unusual prescription pattern and reported it, a commemorative event brought together the survivors, the pharmacist, investigators, and advocates to reflect on the case's lasting impact. David, now 51, spoke about how one observation had changed his understanding of his professional role. 10 years ago I was filling prescriptions, and I noticed something that didn't add up. The same man picking up medications for 6 different women, all claiming they were his wife. I could have dismissed it. I could have decided it wasn't my business. But I trusted my instinct that something was wrong, and I reported it. That decision exposed a predator and saved 6 women from continued exploitation. David described the decade since, developing training programs, teaching thousands of pharmacists to recognize exploitation patterns, and seeing dozens of cases where vigilant pharmacists had helped protect vulnerable people. Pharmacists are uniquely positioned to notice patterns others miss, David said. We see prescriptions across multiple providers. We track controlled substances. We interact with patients and caregivers. When we notice patterns that suggest abuse or exploitation, we have a professional and moral obligation to investigate and report. Individual prescriptions might appear legitimate, but patterns reveal the truth. The 6 survivors, now ranging in age from 85 to 92, spoke about their decade of recovery and resilience. 10 years ago, we were victims of a calculating predator, Dorothy Webb told the audience. Marcus Webb targeted us at our most vulnerable after losing our husbands while we were grieving and lonely. He befriended us, gained our trust, and then exploited us ruthlessly. He stole our money and drugged us into confusion so we couldn't recognize what was happening. But we survived, we recovered, we rebuilt our lives, and we've used our experiences to help protect other elderly people from similar predators. We're not just victims, we're survivors and advocates. The event concluded with recognition for David Kim and the other professionals who'd stopped Webb's exploitation scheme. David received the Idaho Pharmacist of the Year award for his vigilance and advocacy. In his acceptance speech, David emphasized that any healthcare professional could do what he'd done. I noticed a pattern. I trusted my instinct that something was wrong. I reported my concerns. That's not heroic. It's professional responsibility. Every pharmacist, every doctor, every healthcare worker can do the same. Pay attention, notice patterns, report concerns. Your vigilance might save lives. 10 years, 1 pharmacist noticing an unusual pattern, 6 elderly women unknowingly sharing the same predator, 1 man claiming 6 different wives, multiple prescriptions that revealed a scheme, 6 lives saved from continued exploitation, 1 predator imprisoned for life.
Hundreds more vulnerable people protected through enhanced awareness, an entire profession trained to recognize exploitation patterns, systemic reforms protecting elderly people nationwide, one moment of professional vigilance, one decision to report despite uncertainty, one pattern that revealed hidden crimes. That was always enough, more than enough, everything. This story is dedicated to every pharmacist, healthcare provider and professional who pays attention to patterns, trusts their instincts when something seems wrong, and reports concerns that might help vulnerable people. Your vigilance protects those who cannot protect themselves. And to every elderly person, if someone is controlling your medications, isolating you from family, or managing your finances without transparency, reach out for help. You deserve safety, dignity, and proper care. National Elder Abuse Hotline, 1-800-677-1116. Adult Protective Services, contact your local office. You are not alone. Help is available.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.